On May 13th, 2026, snow was falling on the Cairngorms at 1,097 meters. 2 weeks later, temperatures were being projected at 30 degrees Celsius just west of London. Same country, same calendar month. A temperature swing so extreme that if you described it to someone who had never lived in Britain, they would assume you were describing two entirely different countries in two entirely different seasons. And yet, this is the single most important weather story of 2026 that almost nobody is framing correctly. Not as two separate weather events that happen to occur close together, but as one unified story about what the British climate has become and what it now does to a population, an infrastructure network, and a landscape that was never designed to manage swings of this magnitude, this rapidly, at this time of year. The snow and the record heat are not opposites. They are two symptoms of the same condition. And understanding them as a pair, understanding the mechanism that produced both within 14 days, tells you more about where British weather is heading than either event could tell you on its own. The cold snap that brought snow to the Cairngorms on May 13th was not a minor meteorological footnote. The Met Office described conditions during that period as feeling more like early spring than mid-May, with a northerly airflow keeping much of the country in a notably cool air mass, below average temperatures and brisk winds, adding to the chill across northern counties. Temperatures through the middle of that week dipped to single figures across the northern counties of England, while the south hovered in the mid-teens, readings that sat firmly below the seasonal average for the time of year and produced the coldest May night recorded in 5 years across parts of the country. Snow fell on Scottish Highland terrain at over 1,000 meters of elevation. The Cairngorms, which recorded accumulations at 1,097 meters, were not experiencing an unprecedented Scottish weather event in isolation. They were the visible highest altitude expression of an Arctic and northerly airflow that had pushed far enough south to drag genuinely cold air across the entire country from north to south. Met Office meteorologist Greg Dewhurst confirmed publicly that a colder northerly airflow had set in, and that although it should not last too long before milder air returned, the short-term temperature drop was real, significant, and covering a wide geographic area. The nation was, in the language of the forecasters, shivering. What nobody watching that cold snap was expecting, what even the most aggressive of the medium-range forecasts had not yet resolved with confidence, was that the same calendar month, just 14 days later, would be generating a forecast for temperatures approaching or reaching 30 degrees Celsius. The GFS model runs from mid-May began resolving a blocking high-pressure system developing across southern Britain with increasing clarity and cross-run consistency, and what they showed for the final week of May was a 5-day warm sequence beginning May 24th and culminating in a May 28th peak that placed 30-degree readings just west of London. Yorkshire, which had been sitting under a cold northerly airflow and recording temperatures in single figures during the cold snap, was projected to reach 25 to 27 degrees Celsius on the same peak day. The temperature range that England traversed within a single fortnight, from the coldest May nights in 5 years to a potential 30-degree crossing that would challenge the all-time UK May temperature record set in 1944, is not something that fits comfortably into any previous generation's understanding of what British May weather does. The atmospheric mechanism that produced both extremes within the same 2-week window is the key to understanding not just this event, but the broader pattern of UK weather volatility that is becoming more pronounced with each passing year. The cold snap of early to mid-May was produced by a northerly airflow, a wind circulation that draws air southward from the Arctic and subarctic regions above Scotland, pulling temperatures well below the seasonal norm across the entire country as the cold, dense polar air mass moved in. That northerly airflow was itself a product of a specific jet stream configuration, the position and strength of the high-altitude wind ribbon that steers weather systems across the North Atlantic and determines whether the UK receives its more typical mild westerly airflow or is instead exposed to colder air from the north or east. When the jet stream buckles into a configuration that allows a Scandinavian or Greenlandic high-pressure system to build and push cold air southward across the UK, the result is rapid temperature drops, clear skies at night producing sharp frosts, and on the Scottish Highlands, snow. When the jet stream then shifts back toward a pattern that allows a blocking high to develop over southern Britain and channels southerly warm air from the continent northward, the temperature trajectory reverses with an abruptness that feels violent to anyone trying to plan their life around a stable seasonal progression. The distance between those two jet stream configurations is not large in atmospheric terms. The temperature consequence of moving between them in 14 days over the same geographic area is enormous. This is the phenomenon that climate scientists and meteorologists refer to when they discuss the increasing volatility of the UK's weather, and it is driven by a process rooted in the changing thermal dynamics of the Arctic. as global average temperatures have risen due to the accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. The Arctic has warmed at approximately 4 times the global average rate, a process known as Arctic amplification. The significance of Arctic amplification for UK weather is specific and important. The jet stream's position and stability are driven primarily by the temperature contrast between the warm tropics and the cold Arctic. As the Arctic warms faster than the tropics, that temperature contrast decreases, and the jet stream becomes less stable, more prone to buckling into large north-south waves, more likely to get stuck in configurations that produce persistent extremes, and more likely to shift rapidly between configurations in the way that delivered a cold snap and a near record heat event to the same country within the same fortnight. The Met Office's own deep dive analysis of winter 2025 to 2026 documented the unusual persistence of a jet stream behavior. The 2-week swing from Cairngorm snow to London 30-degree heat in May 2026 is a spring expression of the same instability. Britain's preparedness infrastructure, physical, institutional, and psychological, was built for a climate with gentler and more predictable seasonal transitions than the one now being delivered. Housing stock designed to retain heat in winter struggles to release excess warmth in a May heat wave that arrived without gradual seasonal warning. NHS operational protocols that shift from winter pressures to heat preparedness mode across the planned spring transition period face specific challenges when cold snap conditions persist into the second week of May and then give way to near record heat within a fortnight. Network Rail's heat management protocols, which are designed to escalate from baseline spring operations towards summer heat. Readiness in response to temperature trends, observed over weeks, not days, face a different challenge when the temperature trend compresses from cold to extreme heat in less than 2 weeks. The population, which makes its own seasonal behavior adjustments, putting away winter clothing, switching from hot meals to cold drinks, opening windows rather than closing them for warmth, cannot adjust its habits at the speed the atmosphere is changing them. The cognitive and practical lag between what the climate delivers and what the population and its infrastructure are configured for is itself a health and safety risk. And the 2-week snow to heat swing of May 2026 demonstrates that lag in its most concentrated and measurable form. The physiological consequences of the rapid swing from cold to extreme heat are specific and poorly understood in mainstream health communication. Thermoregulation, the body's ability to manage its own core temperature against ambient conditions, relies on a gradual acclimatization process that adjusts the cardiovascular system, the sweat response, and the hormonal systems regulating fluid balance over a period of 7 to 14 days of sustained warm exposure. When a cold snap keeps the body in a physiological winter-spring configuration right up to the point at which extreme heat arrives, that acclimatization process has not started, not one day of it. The body that was experiencing single-digit overnight temperatures in early May is the same body being asked to manage 28 to 30-degree daytime temperatures by the end of the month. The British Heart Foundation's warning that heat waves can increase heart attack mortality risk by up to 50% is based on heat events arriving into a population that has at least had some weeks of seasonal warming. A heat event arriving within 2 weeks of a cold snap arrives into a population with zero thermal acclimatization, and the research evidence on early season versus mid-season heat events is consistent in showing that early season events carry a higher acute health risk per degree of warmth than equivalent temperatures arriving after a normal spring progression. The population groups that bear the heaviest burden from this physiological cold to heat whiplash are the same groups that carry disproportionate risk in any heat event, but with the additional vulnerability of having made no acclimatization progress. Older adults who are managing cold-related health pressures in early May, increased cardiovascular strain from cold temperatures, elevated risk of falls on cold mornings, respiratory challenges from cold air, face the arrival of heat without having had any intermediate period of thermal neutrality in which their systems could reset. The shift from cold stress to heat stress within 14 days is not a neutral interval that systems regulating stress responses do not cycle from one thermal extreme to the other without cost, and the populations already managing chronic conditions that make them sensitive to thermal stress pay the highest cost of rapid thermal cycling between extremes. Research published in the PMC Journal on Health Effects of Hotter UK Summers established that the 1995 heatwave caused a 16% increase in mortality in Greater London specifically, and a 30.7% increase in mortality in the capital during its peak period, and that event arrived after a spring with no comparable cold snap immediately preceding the warm period. The agricultural consequences of the 2-week swing tell a story that is invisible to urban residents, but consequential for food supply chains across the country. Crops and vegetation that had been managing cold snap conditions in early May, with growth retarded, frost risk affecting tender early plantings, and soil temperatures suppressed below the levels that drive active root development, were then subjected to the opposite extreme within a fortnight: stabilize. Cold temperatures in the first half of May suppress the enzymatic processes that drive plant growth and nutrient uptake. A rapid transition to 25 to 30 degree temperatures in the second half of the month can trigger premature flowering in some crops, accelerated maturation that reduces final yield, and heat-driven moisture stress on soils and plants that had no opportunity to build the moisture reserves they would need to buffer a sustained warm period. East Anglia, one of the most agriculturally critical regions in England and sitting within the warmest zone of the heat forecast, experienced both extremes within the same fortnight. The compounding of cold snap growth suppression followed immediately by heat and drought stress creates a crop stress scenario more damaging than either extreme alone would produce, because the plant has no recovery interval between the two challenges. The infrastructure systems of England faced a specific challenge from the 2-week temperature swing that goes beyond what a single heat event or a single cold snap would individually produce, and it is the combination, the rapid sequential exposure to both extremes, that creates the most difficult operational environment for the networks that keep the country functioning. Rail infrastructure is designed to manage both thermal expansion at high temperatures and thermal contraction at low temperatures, but the rate at which it is asked to cycle between those extremes is a critical engineering variable. Steel that expands significantly during a 30-degree May heat event and then contracts again as temperatures return to normal levels following the warm spell has been subjected to a thermal cycle of unusual magnitude and unusual speed. The fatigue stress that accumulates in rail material through repeated thermal cycling, the expansion and contraction of the steel at its joins, at its fastenings, at the points where the track meets the bridge deck or the level crossing, is directly proportional to both the temperature range of the cycle and the speed at which it occurs. A 2-week swing from cold snap temperatures to near record heat and back represents exactly the kind of large, rapid thermal cycle that accelerates fatigue accumulation in rail infrastructure components that were designed for the more gradual and less extreme seasonal transitions of a pre-climate change British calendar. Network Rail's confirmation to Parliament that service-affecting failures double during hot weather periods, and that the cost of a single major heatwave event's rail damage was $2.5 million in 2003, does not capture the additional fatigue cost of the thermal cycling that extreme 2-week swings impose on infrastructure whose service life calculations were made against a climate baseline that no longer exists. The mental health dimension of extreme weather volatility within a short time frame is documented in the research literature, but receives almost no coverage in the context of weather reporting, despite being one of the most widely experienced and least acknowledged consequences of climate-driven weather instability. Research on the psychological effects of weather extremes has established that the subjective experience of unpredictability, of not being able to form reliable expectations about what the next week's conditions will be, produces measurable increases in anxiety, stress, and the sense of environmental threat that contributes to background psychological burden. A population that could previously organize its spring around a reasonably predictable seasonal progression, cool in March, gradually warming through April and May, summer arriving in a recognizable pattern by June, has been progressively deprived of that predictability as the climate has become more volatile. The 2-week swing from snow to near-record heat in May 2026 is an extreme expression of a disorientation that has been building across multiple years of unusual seasonal behavior, and its psychological cost is distributed across the entire population of the affected areas rather than being concentrated in the clinical cases that appear in mental health service statistics. The people who cannot plan a garden project, a sporting event, a family outdoor commitment, or even a seasonal clothing transition with any confidence because the weather swings between extremes within a fortnight are not experiencing a trivial inconvenience. They are experiencing a form of environmental instability that the research literature on eco-anxiety and climate grief has begun to document with increasing precision and seriousness. The energy demand profile generated by the 2-week temperature swing created a specific challenge for the national grid and the energy suppliers serving domestic and commercial customers across England that a single stable weather period would not have produced. The cold snap of early May maintained elevated heating demand well into a period of the calendar year when energy suppliers and grid operators typically begin managing the transition from winter-dominated demand patterns towards summer-dominated ones. Heating systems running in early to mid-May consumed gas and electricity at rates above the seasonal forecast, drawing on the fuel storage and grid capacity that would normally be partially released by that point in the month. Then, within a fortnight, the same grid was being asked to manage a spike in cooling demand, fans, portable air conditioning units, refrigeration systems working harder, data centers increasing their cooling load, As the warm spell arrived, temperatures pushed toward 30 degrees. The switch from heating demand to cooling demand within 2 weeks, across an energy system that was not designed to manage both peaks in rapid succession within a single month, creates a capacity management challenge that is invisible in any individual weather forecast, but very visible in the grid operations data from the period. The energy bills that consumers receive in the months following a 2-week cold snap to heat wave swing reflect the cost of that sequential demand spike in ways that a normal May with stable mid-range temperatures would never generate. It is one of the least discussed but most financially concrete consequences of the weather volatility that climate change is introducing into what used to be the most predictable month of the British meteorological calendar. The historical precedent for a temperature swing of this magnitude within a single British May month is essentially absent from the climate record in anything approaching the concentration and speed of the 2026 event. The Central England temperature record, the longest continuous instrumental temperature record in the world, extending back to 1659, shows that while May has historically been a variable month capable of producing both late frosts and warm spells, the co-occurrence of genuinely cold northerly conditions producing highland, snow and near-record heat approaching 30 degrees Celsius within the same 14-day window has no clear historical parallel at the scale and severity of what May 2026 delivered. Attribution research published in peer-reviewed climate science journals has established that UK heat waves are now 30 times more likely due to human-induced climate change than they would be in a natural climate, and that the frequency of cold snaps has been declining overall even as their occurrence within the same season as heat extremes has become more likely, a consequence of the increased jet stream variability that Arctic amplification drives. The combination of those two trends, heat waves becoming more likely while jet stream instability makes rapid transitions between extremes more probable, is the precise atmospheric recipe for a month that delivers Cairngorm snow in London 30-degree heat within 14 days of each other. The summer that follows this 2-week plot twist carries the full weight of the seasonal outlook that was in place before the cold snap interrupted it. Jim Dale of British Weather Services was explicit that by the time July and August arrive, there is a real chance of returning to territory where 40 degrees Celsius becomes possible, if a heat wave over Spain and the continent provides the northward push that taps into the very high temperatures building across the European landmass. The Met Office's 3-month outlook assigned 40% probability, double the normal baseline, to a hot May through July outcome. The cold snap of early May did not cancel or moderate that seasonal probability. It was a brief interruption in a year-level trend that the forecasting consensus continues to point toward a warm and potentially record-breaking summer. The independent summer 2026 analysis from multiple forecasting organizations flagged near-neutral to weak La Nina conditions in the equatorial Pacific, warm North Atlantic sea surface temperature anomalies that amplify humidity and fuel convective outbreaks, and soil moisture feedbacks from a dry spring that cause parched ground to heat faster than it otherwise would, all 3 factors pointing consistently toward quick-building heat waves, intense thunderstorm, breakdowns, and multiple significant warm periods across the June to August window. The Madden-Julian oscillation, which operates on 2 to 4 week scales and can switch summer storminess on and off rapidly, adds a layer of short-range volatility on top of the longer-range warm signal that makes smooth predictions impossible, but reinforces the expectation of a summer defined by extremes rather than stability. The 2 weeks from Cairngorm snow to London heat are not the whole story of 2026. They are its most dramatic chapters to date, compressed into a time frame that reveals more about the condition of the British climate than any single event could. The plot twist is not that the weather was unpredictable. The plot twist is that this level of unpredictability, this range, this speed, this severity, is what British weather now routinely does, and the data says it will keep doing it with wider swings at greater frequency as the jet stream continues destabilizing and the climate continues moving in the direction that decades of evidence have pointed it toward.